Family's here.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Ricky.
Hi, Patricia.
Okay, Patricia, to be exact, our book club was our first meeting was February 2nd, 2021. So
Okay. 3.5
yeah,
years.
3.5 years. Yep.
I do want to start by just, of course, welcoming Andre. Thank you so very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
I picked up a book. It's called, I've always wanted to read a book of his. It was called Dirty Love, right up my alley. And I read it, of course, Domestic Abuse. And I loved his writing so much. I kept picking up more and more books of his. And I just kept seeing domestic abuse all the way through. And then came a little bit later to Townie and saw some of his autobiography, but then reached out to him and asked for October's Domestic Abuse Awareness Month if he would join us to really talk about the domestic abuse running through all his books. And here he is. Andre, welcome. And has anybody ever pointed that out before? I mean, I'm sure they have, but as far as the domestic abuse running through so many of your books?
Actually, Patricia, no. And first of all, thank you for having me. And everybody, thank you for being here and reading books, especially fiction. No, you're the first one who pointed that out. I said, really? It's in all the books? I hadn't, I was surprised to hear that, but then I was not surprised.
So if we could start with Townie, your father, like the way he abandoned your family, like to me, that is kind of abusive. Would you think, what do you say about that as far as terming that abusive?
Well, my father was such a, and if you haven't read my father, he was a beautiful short story writer, one of the greatest our country's ever produced, actually. Beautiful master short story writer, Andre Dubus. He was neglectful. He was not there. And it was writing that memoir that actually, the act of writing it sort of informed me that I was more fatherless than I'd even been consciously aware. It was a very short marriage. My parents were very young. They may have lasted 9 years, 4 kids in 9 years. And so I grew up with a mom in, first world poverty, a single mom raising 4 kids alone. All of her family's from Louisiana. They moved to New England. So she had no friends. She had no family. She had nobody to turn to. She had no education. She had no job. And that's how we began our lives as adolescents. My older sister, my younger brother and sister, and I. And so if you haven't read any of my work or that memoir, I should tell you that because, Patricia, I'm so honored to be here. I think that one of the central themes of that memoir, of course, is my own hatred of cruelty and injustice and bullies. So that means I despise violence against women and kids. I despise, frankly, many forms of capitalism. I despise racism and misogyny and homophobia and any system where the powerless lords over the powerful lords over the powerless. My sister is a national leader in domestic violence homicide prevention. My sister, Suzanne Dubus, she's worked closely with Joe Biden when he was vice president. So this is an issue near and dear to my heart. And one of the things I read about, and I'll get back to the dad question if you want, but I just for those who may not have read that book or any of my books, Patricia, is that, I was a small kid, I'm still a small bone guy. And, I lived in tough mill towns, in poverty. And, I wore glasses, read books, and used adverbs in daily speech. So, what happened to me? I was just such a target. And one afternoon after my little brother Jub was 13, I was 14, when he was beaten really badly by a grown man, and I could not defend my brother, I snapped and became a fighter. I changed my life and became a guy who did hundreds of push-ups and sit-ups and hit the heavy bag and lifted weights and ran miles because I was training myself to protect my family from more violence. And I became a vigilante for like 10 years. I would go to a bar and wait for some guy to backhand his wife or girlfriend, which tragically was not hard to find in my town. And then I beat him up and put him in the hospital and frankly try to kill him. And I did this for years. And frankly, it was finding creative writing that got me off this path of violence. And I frankly learned to hate the sin and not the sinner. But that's an opening thought for me. My dad was a very flawed man. He was a very beautiful man in many ways. He was very generous and brave and compassionate, but he was not a present dad or a good husband as a young man. He just wasn't. So, I mean, just a short introduction, about me as a person. I've been with the same woman for 36 years without strain. I'm not patting myself on the back. Just how hard can it be? The old man was a real strayer. We're blessed with 3 kids who are grown and grew up in a happy home. So, and yet I write these novels, Patricia, as you know, that are fraught with peril and trouble, and frankly, a lot of men behaving badly. So where that comes from, I don't know.
Well, a couple of points I want to make is there's no bigger bully than a domestic abuser.
I agree.
Straight out, because and just for the background of this conversation too, in the past, just like 8 or 9 days, we've had 3 women murdered in Maine by their exes. 2 days ago, a man killed his wife and his grown daughter, and then about a week ago, a man who was released early from prison killed 39-year-old Virginia Cookson. And everyone at the rally we had for her said that she was like 100 pounds, and this guy was a big bruiser. I mean, what kind of bully would like beat up or a little woman, So when you say that you hate bullies, I mean, I can see why you might focus on domestic abuse, because they're the biggest bullies around.
To back up a bit about creative writing for a second, if I teach nothing in my creative writing classes, and a few of the Ricky's been in one of my workshops, Martha has, I keep talking about one thing and one thing only, and that is to trust what you're curious about and to follow it. And I find that over the years with my fiction, especially, that I tend to be drawn to situations where things can go horribly wrong. And maybe that comes from having a difficult childhood. Maybe it comes from something deeper and more mysterious than that. I don't really know, everybody, but I am pulled to trying to imagine my way through situations where it's already hard, it's going to get harder, and then how do you survive? And then what do you do, if anything? But I'll shut up. You can ask me a question or tell me something.
Well, I do want to say again, the subtlety of with your father. I mean, the fact that he was so neglectful, and the fact that you lived in such dire poverty, and there were 4 kids, and he left for a much younger woman, and abandoned, the family. Claire, someone pointed out that just the past decade or so, there's been recognition of artists and others who are outstanding in their field, but have specific issues with abuse and controlling. I'm not saying your father's abuse and controlling, but that neglectful thing. So just the fact that someone is, and also, what did that do with you, Andre? Because, for instance, a father that is very celebrated to the outside world, but you may know, maybe like the fact that he's not paying much attention to you. How does that make you feel when like the whole world has him and celebrates him? But was he that very famous when you were growing up too, or did that come a little bit later?
His career was building slowly over the years. I think he really started to get justifiable recognition for his work when I was in my 20s. I remember I was at a reading in New York City, and he was introduced. And let me just say, I love and miss my father, and I revere his work, and I teach it myself to my college students. But a woman turned to me, and I was just beginning therapy, frankly, starting to look back at my life. This was way before I wrote that memoir about my growing up. And she said, "Was he just the most perfect father in the world?" And I just, I just smiled, and well, let's listen to him. And just, I couldn't answer. No, he was a very flawed man. He was not. No, he was, and frankly, I didn't get really angry about him as a dad until I became a father myself. And then I got to see all that he did not do, and all that. And frankly, then I felt sorry for him. you know, he left when we were kids, and he missed everything. He missed everything. We never spent the night once at his apartment. There was no contact except he'd pick us up on a Sunday, take us to a restaurant he couldn't afford, and drop us off. And, you know, years later, he would say that he dated his children. You know, the sad fact is that as a writer myself, I revere him as an artist, and would certainly aspire to do anything he did in that way. But as a father and a husband, he is not my role model, and will not ever be. And it saddens me to no end to say that. But no, he had a friend, a dear friend, who drowned in his 50s, and he was a professor, and he was my hero because he had one wife he never cheated on. He treated her like the equal she was. He talked to children as regular human beings without patronizing even kids. He was kind, humble, beautiful, and that's the kind of man I wanted to be.
And it sounds like the man you are. He seems like he was your role model, and you had a good role model.
I did. It was him. It was one of my dad's friends. It wasn't my dad. But there's a lot about my dad I revere. And, you know, I don't want to minimize the fact that he was a beautifully generous man. He was compassionate, but he had his issues. And no, he wasn't, I think he had some real misogynistic tendencies, frankly. And I think it came from growing up in a weird alcoholic Irish Catholic house in the deep South in the 30s and 40s with an overbearing mother. I mean, I've got my own theories, but I have flaws. I am not a misogynist, and boy, and I know it when I see it. I can smell it in men, and I can smell it in a few women. But I mean, the irony, you guys, and this is, you know, I'm sure there are other writers out in this room here. My father wrote beautifully from the point of view of women. This is what makes it even more complicated. He's got some stories that are so gorgeous, written deeply from the point of view of women. But I would argue, too, that it's also from the lens of a man who grew up in the 40s and 50s. One of my issues with the old man is, and it's all through the work, which I've reread as an older guy, older than the man who wrote them when he wrote them, my young father, is he saw women as they're here to help men. And I have never felt that about women. In fact, when my 29-year-old daughter Ariadne turned 12 or so, and she was getting all this male attention already, took her for a drive, and we were having our little coffees. I said, you know, honey, you know that girls and women are not here to help men. You're not here to give them pleasure. You're not here to serve them. You're not here to do anything for them whatsoever. You're equal beings in a different body, and that's that. So please know. And she, you know, by the way, she's getting her PhD in feminist philosophy. And when she graduated from UMass Lowell, where I teach, and I got to give her her degree the night before the ceremony, she said, "Dad, I want to see my mortarboard. I decorated." I said, "Yeah." And she decorated in this nice silver calligraphy. Did it say thanks, Mom, Dad? Did it say class of? No, it said fuck the patriarchy.
That's
I
awesome.
said, honey, would it be patriarchal for me to say, can you put an asterisk in the U? He said, fuck that. Okay, honey, you go. So
That's
anyway, I have all sorts of strong feelings about all of this.
So someone, Gina just pointed out when you said that, what you said to your daughter about how the women are not there to serve men. She said, I wish my father had said that. And I do know that there are women that we are talking with who had fathers who, well, you know, abusive men who were abusive to their families and their wives, and it transferred to the way they treated their daughters. And that's a really sad thing.
Yeah, it is. And the generations repeat themselves. You know, I do think there's some hope, and I'd like to hear from you all and you, Patricia, but you know, I love young people today. I mean, they're anxious, they're depressed, they're confused, they're on their gadgets too much. But as a group, I think the men are far less misogynistic. They're far, you know, as a group, male, female, non-binary, they're less materialistic. They love the earth more.
Well, can I just interrupt you for a second about that?
Yeah.
And that brings to mind Devin in Dirty Love.
Yeah.
So yes, I see that too. Like sometimes it seems like that. Like the way they're gender fluid and they're not race, you know, they're very welcoming and accepting. But then you have these boys who are looking at porn like from a very young age. And I think it seemed kind of prescient. Is that the word prescient for you in this book? Was it 2013
13.
and talking about how like it sounded like she was gang raped and they filmed her and, you know, spread it around, and just think about what's going on now with that. And the way what we see, Andre, is when we're talking, like I was talking to a high school principal in North Haven and wanting to bring a dating abuse awareness project, and just like, you know, tell me what you think is needed. And he said, just toxic masculinity to these high school boys. Like he just sees it is so rampant. So what do you say about that? Like, I know you're saying that, yes, you do see wonderful men
Oh, I
and
have a lot.
women,
Yeah.
but
I mean, yeah, thank you. So I don't own an iPhone, and I've never sent a text. I've never been on social media. So I'll never get a menu anymore. And I've never hired an Uber. I am philosophically opposed to the gadgets because they're addictive and they're on them 6 to 11 hours a day. And I make a point of talking to young people, especially young men, about porn. I have nothing against pornography or erotica, but we know it's addictive. We know they're staring at it hours a day. And a teenage boy will already objectify a woman because of hormones. You just look at that beautiful body, look at this, and, you know, he gets an erection every 3 seconds. But then to add porn to it, which is not about women's pleasure, we all know. I think it's done a real number. I mean, I bet there are studies to back this up. I'm no expert. But there's been such an increase of sexual violence across campuses. I think it's because young men are staring at the sex act done by a capitalistic, misogynistic system, and it's just even easier now to see, well, that's a life support system for a vagina and breast and all the rest. And so it disturbs me deeply, and I talk to young men about it all the time. I think it's a real issue.
yeah.
Could I speak to this for a minute?
Yeah, who is that?
That's
Yes,
Mia.
Mia. Yes.
Hi, Mia. I recognize
Hi.
you.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
So proud UMass Boston graduate and psychotherapist and a member of Culture Reframed, which is an incredible organization that educates people on the harms of violent online pornography. And the thing about today's pornography is that it's incredibly, incredibly violent. But too many people, even therapists, are thinking, this is the 70s where the people walk in the rain, the umbrella gets ruined in the storm, they start to make out, and then next they're having intercourse. This is, today's pornography is all about degradation, heavy on the gang rape, heavy on the violence, and degradation in the worst ways.
Very, very good point, and very, very important. And thank you very much.
And immensely disturbing, just immensely
It's
disturbing.
immensely disturbing. Andre, I did want to ask you also with House of Sand and Fog. So I want to start off talking about the subtle domestic abuse that I sort of was seeing through your book. And it was interesting because I started reading House of Sand and Fog, and I don't have the book with me here, but I just remember he, obviously is controlling, or it's definitely like he's the master of the house, and that's, the way that household is. But then there was something that was really chilling kind of early on when, did he point out that he was physically violent at one point to his wife? Early on, you mentioned that. Is that true in my memory that happened?
Yeah.
The way you introduced that, it was really chilling.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah,
talk
I don't want to make a broad general statement about any culture. The truth is Iranian ancient Persian culture has gorgeous qualities, literature, music, art. All the Iranians I've known have have been some of the most effusively warm, loving, welcoming human beings I've ever met. And just on a quick side note, may they get rid of those mullahs as soon as they can and go back to having a democracy. But yeah, I mean, look, clitorectomies come from Islam, and it's predominantly Sunni and not Shiite. But honor killings. There's a scene in that novel, I think you might remember, Patricia, which happens in Iran all the time, but it's more common in Sunni Muslim cultures as opposed to Shiite, where the honor of the family is at stake. If there's even the hint that a young woman may have been, compromised her honor by having sex without marriage or whatever outside marriage, and then they murder her. And so I was trying to write from the point of view of a man from that culture, a very powerful man in that culture. He worked closely with the Shah, buying F-16s from United States and Israel. And I based him on a father of a girlfriend that I had in college in the 70s. And, Hemingway's got a great line he wrote to his editor, Maxwell Perkins at Scribner's. He said, Max, the job of the writer is not to judge, but to seek to understand. And I totally agree with him that you must, if you judge your characters, they'll walk away just like people will in your life. If they feel judged by you, they'll just walk away. So you got to find a way to write about all of them. And one of the things that the experiences for me writing about that character in House of Sand and Fog, Colonel Barani, is he was also a really loving dad, and he wanted the best for his kids. He wanted his wife to be happy, but he was also a controlling tyrant. And it really was, there's a climactic scene when they're being held hostage in the bathroom, and she yells at him, "You did this for you. You did it for you." And he did. It was all about his pride, his reflection of himself in the mirror. And so ultimately, but there's this wonderful line, from an actor director friend of mine who did this performance, and this is at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London. And his teacher said to him afterwards, "That was good, but it wasn't great." He said, "Why wasn't it great? I worked my ass off. I'm doing everything you're showing me." He said, "What can I tell you?" He said, "None of us are one note. We are all a symphony." And so I say that because, this is a group around the hatred of domestic violence and taking action to help prevent it or do something about it. I was, what the white, I'm sure Patricia, the White Ribbon campaign. So I was part of that early chapter in New England a few years ago. And if you guys don't know about it, it's the notion that, look, domestic violence is not a women's problem. It's a male problem, and, one of the board members was a nice guy, even though he's a banker, nothing against bankers, but he said, "What we're doing is we're telling women," and excuse me, this sounds like cartoonish and it minimizes, lethal violence, but, the boys are throwing rocks at the girls, and we're teaching the girls how to hold up a better trash can lid to defend themselves from the rocks. What we need to do is go to the boys and say, "You don't throw rocks at women." And so I don't know how I got to that, but there you go.
Well, the other thing, and in about 10 minutes, I'm going to open it up to everybody to please chime in, but a few things I just wanted to cover. So the thing that's interesting you say about your writing, where it's important that it not be black and white. And that's with domestic abusers too. And that's where it is complicated. Like sometimes, and that's what's really hard about it sometimes, is because you have had good times with the person, and like my ex, he would cry like I don't know, when his kitten died, he cried. So I knew he had some feeling somewhere or something, so it's just not black and white. And you're right. And just basically say like all these guys are monsters. Well, I do want to say that when I think about some of the things they do, but if you do start examining it, it is not black. It's not as black. It's not really black and white.
Well, can I speak to that too? I mean, it's the action is purely not black and white. It's
Right.
black.
Right. It is. Yeah.
Do not control and hurt someone, especially in
Exactly.
marriage. You've vowed to love and protect the rest of your lives together. One of my novels, I don't know if you got to this one, Gone So Long, is from the point of view of a man who killed his wife.
Right.
And should I tell you how I came to write that one? Because that was so goddamn hard for me. I'll compress this story, but I was asked to write a feature about a man doing time in prison. And it's a really interesting story. Basically, what makes it interesting is the man changed his life in prison, became actually a wonderful human being, and contributed to society, but he was never going to get out. He escaped. He's 20 years on the lam. He helps sex workers get off the street. He sets up daycare centers for poor, people of color. He's on the church board. He does all this stuff. He gets caught. He goes back to prison and he dies in prison. It was a really good story about the power of change. And so I'm interviewing. So then I started to write a screenplay about this. And I'm interviewing a guy in Chicago who did time with my guy, did 15 years. And this man was in his 60s. I was in my 50s at the time. And we had a lovely 2-hour lunch. He was very respectful to the waitress, which is also like a litmus test for me. Is he good to the help?
Right.
And he gave me wonderful material for I filled a notebook, mainly prison details. And then he works as a landscaper, and I'm paying the bill. And I say, hey man, I know I'm not supposed to ask why you did time, but why did you do time? Oh, I stabbed my wife to death. I could hardly swallow. I could hardly take a breath. I mean, I hate these people. I mean, I just, so I just now wanted to get away from it as fast as I can, but it's one of those restaurants where the hallway's like a mile long to the parking lot. We're walking down it together. So I heard myself ask him, so did you guys have any kids? He said, oh yeah, but they don't want to see me. And I could not get that out of my head. It wasn't just that. It never left my psyche. I'm the best part of my life is being a dad. And so 3 years. So for 3 years, it kept saying, write me, come to me, come to me. No, I don't want to write about you. I don't want to come near you. I don't want anything to do with inhabiting the skin of a man who killed his wife. I'm not doing it. And then I had to, because I had to. And so my way in was, well, how do I become a man? I've never even when I was, a 7-year-old, I'd never even raised my hand to one of my sisters, never mind what he did. How do I become him? And so I just had to let go. There's a wonderful line from Rumi, the 12th century Sufi poet, of course, sell your cleverness and purchase bewilderment. So I had to ask myself, okay, what if I haven't seen what I've got this child made from love. I take away her mother. She'll never have a mother again. It's not her fault she hasn't had a mother. It's not her fault what I did. I'm, the character. I haven't seen her in 40 years and I'm dying. And so my way in was, he's very sick. He's not going to live much longer. He wants to see his grown daughter before he's gone. And my way in was my own fatherhood. In fact, I dedicated that novel to my daughter, Ariadne. But, there's no way I could have written from that character's point of view if I did not, and it's going to sound like bumper sticker Christianity. I'm not a Christian, but I do like this thought. I just had to hate the sin and not the sinner.
Mhm.
And as I got deeper and deeper into it, it became very clear to me, in this character's case anyway, nobody could hate what he did more than he did. Now, that's not to suggest.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
So we had a board member named John Wilson, and he's really, you might want to get to know him if you don't know him, but his whole thing is it's victim centric, and it's when it could help the victim to connect them with the perpetrator of violent crime that may have killed the daughter or may have killed something like that. So he works in prisons. So he said that he works with every kind of criminal. He works with murderers, he works with rapists, he works with domestic abusers. He said domestic abusers are the only criminals that never think they were wrong. And I'm wondering about your character, but you know more because you created him. But the idea that did he really, or was it blaming her for something? Like, do they really think he really believed that he did something wrong?
All of the above. Yeah, I was going to say, when I said no one hated what he did more than he did, oh, but there are all sorts of excuses he makes throughout the novel. So yeah. I'm totally aware of that.
Okay,
Sadly.
good.
Yeah. No, yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting, isn't it? Because it's something about, that's the thing about domestic abusers. Like it's everybody else's fault all the time. And it'd be one thing if he really was remorseful and he believed to his core that he was remorseful and he was wrong. And then maybe he and his daughter could have, I wonder about that, you know, if that
Yeah.
was the case, redemption, when you admit and you ask for forgiveness and you're really serious about that.
Can I just, before, I know we want to bring in other humans, but I do want to say one more thing. And I try not to ever say anything didactic or polemical in my fiction. I try to just be the characters and let the stories speak for themselves. And I always find that in that way, the writing is larger than the writer. But I do have a bit of my own theory about domestic violence, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, Patricia, or anybody. You know, I was born in 1959, and I grew up in a time where the worst thing you could be called was a sissy or a pussy or a faggot. Forgive the language, but you know what I'm saying. The worst. And so, and the last thing you want to be called is the F word. The last thing you want to be called is all the epithets for being gay. And so my own theory is that, so many men are so terrified of being pigeonholed as that,
Yes.
that they don't have any close relationships with other boys or men. And so
Mm.
they put all of their emotional eggs in one basket, and that's my woman. She's going to be my everything. She's going to listen to me. She's going to be my lover. She's going to be my cook. She's going to be my mommy. She's going to iron. She's going to do this. She's going to take care of me. And when that relationship goes south, it goes to a very deep survival level where things get, murderous, right?
Mhm.
Murderous panic. I think maybe one way to fight male violence against women, of course, it's decades of work needed, is to encourage boys and men to be intimate with each other, to be able to have deep, close relationships. You're not asking your wife, your spouse, your female partner to be everything. And it's just a thought. I think
That's
that
interesting. Does anybody
the
out
men
there?
that I've met who get really angry at their wives, they don't have other people they can talk to.
Oh, well,
They
that's
say,
true because it's a hallmark of domestic abuse. They isolate you, and also they have no friends. My ex had no friends. How many women out here who identify as survivors, if you want to put their hands up, would you say that the domestic abuser had no friends? I mean,
well,
and I just want to mention some other people who have commented. One other person, I completely agree with what Andre says, and another person, my ex has no actual close friends. He doesn't know how to relate on a deeper level. Loudon, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yes, thank you. I was just going to offer a quick comment there. First, I will note that my father is actually Iranian and my ex-husband is Iranian, and both have very controlling personalities. And I have so many comments I could say, but I've been nodding vigorously with everything that you've said because it really hits home with me and all makes a lot of sense. But I just wanted to quickly comment on the friendship thing. One thing I noticed, again, in agreement with everything that was said, I noticed a lot of times with the abusers that have come in contact, there's a huge, I sense huge insecurities coming from them, and they play those and they pull from, in my experience, pulling on my vulnerabilities and using that against me for that isolation. But in terms of their friendships, I raised my hand with the no friends, because when I think about it, my ex and my father both had acquaintances, but it was very transient. Their friends were constantly changing. They didn't have their close circle of people that they could depend on and rely on. And I just thought that was interesting to point out as well.
Mm-hmm. I have a lot of male friends, and some are deeply flawed, as people are, and especially when I go when I'm with a young man getting married for the first time, I make a point of telling him just what I said earlier. I said, it's about equality, buddy. It's not, I don't know. I think that men who marry women hoping they'll be taken care of are making a fatal mistake. We should
Wait,
both
say that again. Say that again.
I
What did
think
you say?
men who get married hoping they're going to marry someone to take care of them are already creating something really toxic.
Yeah.
Here, look, we care for each other. We take turns caring for each other. But I know too many men who for me are little boys. They're not men. I don't even consider them men. I don't care if they make $1 million a year and bench press 300 pounds. They're little boys if they expect wife to be mommy, lover, best friend. I think, and so to your point, Lawden, yes, it's deeply insecure. And so I think, again, all those emotional eggs are put in one basket. And when that goes south, they go banshee and it gets really dangerous. And, it takes a village to raise a child. I think it takes a village to support a marriage.
And to call out an abuser.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fucking A, excuse my French. Call them out. And too many men don't.
Yeah. And the thing that you just made me think about is a lot of times a woman is with a man who's very, very abusive, decade after decade. And then she gets to be like 75 and then he gets sick and she friggin' takes care of him for the last, part of her life. She's taking care of him, which so irritates me. So what you just said about how men shouldn't expect that, but sometimes they get that. They get the woman who waits till just is abused by them. And then they're taken care of by that woman for, until their dying day so that's totally comfortable for him, which is so aggravating.
Yeah, Gina has something to say.
Gina, yes.
Hi, I was just going to say that I had 3 different abusers and all of them had a big social circle of men who cheered them on when he would threaten me and just egg him on. I think in my experience has been, it's more of a generational convention of holding the woman down and better role models of men, fathers being around. That would have been tremendous.
Yeah. And
I'm sorry that happened to you, Gina. And my hunch though about guys with friends, I'm talking about men who can look each other in the eye and tell them what they're really thinking and feeling. Men who can hold another man and cry. A man who can say, I'm scared. Not standing side by side with a beer in his hand, watching the Patriots telling dirty jokes. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having, that kind of fun. I'm saying that when we talk about men with friends, I think that men, look, let me tell you something. My bachelor dinner 36 years ago, I said to my best friends and my brother, I don't want any porn. I don't want any strippers. I don't want any misogynistic shit. I don't want any of this crap that I've been to in the blue collar neighborhoods where I grew up, where it was just sex workers doing horrible stuff. I mean, it was horrible. I said, I want 10 men. We're all going to cook. We're going to sit around and we're going to be together as men. We're going to tell stories. We're going to eat, drink, and be together as men as I step into this institution with a woman. I am not going to be in prison, so I don't need to get sex with this sex worker. We don't need to be making sex jokes. And so, I just have strong feelings about this. The problem is with how we raise boys and men. And look, yeah, certainly, women are still being sold a line of goods about what their job is in a marriage, even now in 2024. But I don't know.
And Andre, were some of the people in that party with you, were they friends from the olden days who might not have had that sensibility?
None of them had that sensibility.
Oh, okay.
They wanted to bring in a stripper. I said,
Okay.
no, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
I have nothing against women who make a living stripping. I have a problem with a lot of it, but it's their choice. Yep. Look, I'm a feminist.
Love
okay?
it.
I believe in that's all I'm saying.
And
We're
I
not
do want to, someone did say, Paula, to your point that you said before, someone commented, Paula, I hate hearing that it's still going on with police. When I had a protection from abuse and called the police in 1990, the response was, it's late. Why don't you kiss and make up? And then, and then Paula commented that it happens in Lewiston. Recently in Aroostook County, she was arrested after calling for help because of a drunk and verbally abusive tenant. Does anybody have any comments for Andre about his books that we've read and talk about his writing or any of the characters in the book that they want to talk about or make comments or questions, particularly about any domestic abuse that that was raised there, but doesn't need to be about that?
Gina's raising her hand.
Gina.
Hey, Andre, I had the pleasure of reading Town I'm a big fan of memoirs, and so many things, so many things struck me, but I knew I was reading the right book when I read this. It was early on in the book, and you were talking about running with your father, right? And you said, I couldn't remember ever feeling so good about life, about me, about what else might be ahead if you were just willing to take some pain, some punishment. And when I read that, I was like, you get it. And that line was everything to me. And I just appreciated seeing it. I also appreciated later on when you said, when you're referencing the other kids in college, how you felt out of place and out of touch. And you said that they were all reared from comfort. And that was something else that really struck a chord with me. Even now, I have a very good friend who's had a wonderful life. And she said to me, why would you drink pickle juice? And that was so odd to me that there are people who don't understand it's not a choice.
Right.
Sometimes you have to make things happen and keep on going and finding joy where you're at, or comfort that you can. And there were so many moments like that for me. And I actually purchased 4 of your books, and I can't wait to continue.
Oh, Gina, thank you. I really
Absolutely.
I appreciate you reading that, and appreciate what you said. You know, in that moment, yeah, I ended up running accidentally 11 miles with my dad and my sister's 2 small shoes, and I only run once in my life, and that's when I was 8 years old. I only run 2 miles, and I'm glad you pointed out that line, because you know, one of the things I discovered writing that memoir is that, yeah, I became a fighter. I became a very violent young man, but yeah, I was violent against violent people. It's not good. Violence creates nothing but more violence. But I did learn that you can change your life. And it began by changing my body and my relationship to my body. I went from being soft to hard, from passive to active. And I went from being a victim to a non-victim. But it took decades. And I am, when I say I went from being a victim to a non-victim, I don't want to minimize that journey, especially for women stuck in abusive relationships. But I became homicidal. I became a very dangerous young man, and was creative writing discovering that changed my life. And that whole comfort thing, I have a new book out called Ghost Dogs on killers and kin. It's a book of essays, and Gina, in there is one essay about having grown up with a woman who would ask the same questions. How can you drink pickle juice? She grew up in a much different world. And thank you for reading that.
Could we talk about Mark was just very interesting in Dirty Love. And I particularly thought it was interesting how you brought in how he changed to be better at his job, and he brought that into his marriage. And that was the fatal error really there, right? And then Laura is so sympathetic, the character, and you see how she slipped away from him, and it's just too late. You know, he can't get her back. So that's very poignant.
Well, thank you for noticing him. Fiction writers are terrible people. I based him on a high school friend who was very much like the kind of man I'm talking about. You know, decent guy, worked hard at work. You know, there is no black and white, right? It's all gray. The actions are black and white. You know, an evil action's an evil action. But he was a controller, controlled the hell out of his wife, and he didn't even know he was doing it. And I think she wasn't quite aware of it for years, and then she was, and she fled. She took a lover and left him, and he had nothing left. Thankfully, in that story, he doesn't go the route that too many men go. He turned his shit more towards himself and became self-destructive as opposed to destructive of her.
There was
But
so
he's definitely a man who's, I don't know if he's gonna get well enough to have good love before he's dead.
there was a lot of tension because it seemed like he was going to kill her. Like, did you know that he wasn't going to? Did you have it?
No, I never know. I write one word at a time. I
Really?
never know where it's going. I just have no idea. And that's why I love writing to this day. I don't know what's going to happen word to word. I go with them.
Wow. We have Ricky, and I think Nancy also has a question, but Ricky, yes.
Just very quickly, Andre, I've been in a workshop with you. You are a brilliant workshop leader. I got so much out of that, but I have, I've read Such Kindness, Townie, and Dirty Love. And the thing, you said something earlier about something about being a symphony, that we are it's not whatever that was you said.
He said to him, none of us are one note. We are all a symphony.
A symphony. I agree 100%. And what happens to me, I was married to a pedophile, and my daughter was married to a domestic violence abuser. And the thing that would happen to me, and it happened with your characters, I'd be pissed off at a character of yours, and then he'd say or do something, and I'd go, oh, and all of a sudden I had these empathic feelings toward him and kindness. And not that I never didn't care, but because you write so beautifully with that. But I think as somebody who's experienced both those, and I certainly have had a lot to do with my ex-son-in-law, and I'm a therapist by trade, my empathy gets me in trouble. It gets me in trouble, and I end up thinking, oh, it's not that bad, or it's going to get better because I'm hopeful, or whatever, when I agree 100% that domestic abusers, the chance of any kind of restoration is slim to impossible. And so I think, and I've worked with women who have been in domestic relationships, and I think the hope that it's going to change, the empathy, the sort of understanding, the whatever, which is so much of who we are as women, is also what, for me, got me in trouble and had me stay in a marriage a lot longer than I wanted to, because I kept seeing all facets of his, and in no way justified his behavior. I don't mean that at all.
Right. No, I totally understand what you're saying, how the empathy gets you in trouble, because it leads to forgiveness, and maybe undeserved forgiveness over and over again. When, I worked in corrections for a while in my 20s, and halfway house for convicted adult felons out of a maximum security penitentiary in Colorado. And it was a very interesting learning experience. I was in my early 20s. I was just starting to write fiction, and there was this one guy who I really liked because we would talk about books. He was kind of quiet, and he read good novels. We talked about novels, and then I found out that he killed his girlfriend's 2 kids. And what could I do with that? But what I couldn't deny, and this is also what I felt after that lunch with that murderer in my research lunch in Chicago, was I couldn't deny that I still liked him for those 2 hours. And so not talking about the other guy, but the guy who killed the two boys, it took me a long time to allow myself to feel empathy for someone, and then, but still lock his ass up.
Yeah, that's the thing.
I think there's a way to wish them some sort of a spiritual growth before they're dead, but you're not going to fucking get out with us anymore, buddy. And so I think it's tough. One of my favorite lines is from a Tom Waits song. There is no devil. There's just God when he's drunk. And what I love about that, it's blasphemy to some ears, but every baby's born beautiful, needing love and wanting love and blah, blah, blah. And then we screw it up. And so, you look at the word pervert, the Latin root actually means to turn away from, the pervert, the pedophile say. Well, what are you turning away from? Well, the light that we were born with. Somewhere along the way, we turn away. We get into darkness. And so, I don't know, man. It always comes down to hating the sin, not the sinner in me. But sometimes they have to be locked up and stay there.
Yeah, you can feel sorry for them, but society needs to be protected, and especially the woman from him. Nancy, did you have your hand up before?
Oh, I did. I was just going to talk also about Mark Welch from Dirty Love. And Andre, it's nice to see you. And it's hard to reconcile the person in front of me with the person who wrote the rage of Mark Welch in Dirty Love. But one of the things that struck me, and it may be very obvious to other people here, is that so much of the fuel for his rage, his outrage, was this feeling of like self-pity. He was very sorry for himself. It was almost like a babyish bully thing. And I know that those things go together, but I wondered if you've all seen that kind of thing, or your thoughts on that like a larger degree of self-pity in someone who's abusive than you might see in a person who's not doing that.
Yeah, let's have some comments, ladies. If you care to. Yeah, yes, Nika.
I actually, no one's spoken about such kindness yet. And I, just to change the subject slightly, but I thought it was interesting how the main character was not really an abuser, but people around him were. Can you talk about why you chose that style?
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for reading that book. But I do want to say one thing about Nancy, your comment about Mark. You know, again, I really do try to write without judgment when I'm writing from a male, female, whoever, whatever character shows up point of view. I really just try to become them. And so you got to do it with empathy and curiosity and all that. But what I so much love about the writing process, and I know there are a bunch of other writers in this meeting, is the moments of surprise. And so there's that moment, right, where Mark sleeps with that other woman the first time he slept with someone after he and his wife crash and burn, and she calls him out, says, "So you're really an asshole, aren't you?" Or whatever she said. I forgot what she said, but I remember when she wrote that. Wow, he really is an asshole, isn't he? Because I was working really hard just to be him, and became very clear that he needs a lot of help in terms of opening his heart and, you know, loving in a good way.
It seemed like he felt he had a right to be. He had a right to do what he wanted because he'd been
Oh.
wrong. And it was so, I don't know, I haven't seen that from a lot of people.
Right from his point of view, I felt such straight white male American privilege, I can't tell you.
Yeah.
He's a man. He's a man. He's an earner. I bought the house. I paid for it. What's my wife doing screwing this guy she met at the gym? Yeah. Oh, so is it Mika? Is that your name? I know you,
It
right?
is.
We've met,
I don't
right?
know.
Well,
I don't know.
hello.
Not that I know of. Do you live in Maine?
No, but I'm going to be there next week. You know, Tom Lowe, the main character in that novel, Such Kindness, he really rose from my fears, my terrors. You know, I grew up in scarcity, as some of you know from having read my stuff. And, you know, I grew up with a mom. She was either going to pay the rent on time or we were going to have heat, not at the same time. She's either going to have enough gas in the car to get to work or we're going to have groceries, not at the same time. The rent was always late. I mean, I still have this lingering, you know, devil in my head who's the pissed off landlord knocking the door for the rent check that she doesn't have.
Right.
And so I imagine, what if my writing never took off? And what if I was still a self-employed carpenter, which I was for years? And what if I got hurt and I still had a mortgage to pay and kids to educate? And what would it be then? And Tom Lowe emerged, Mika. I began to see a man on the couch in subsidized housing and began to feel he was in chronic pain. And so around him are other poor people. And so the honest answer is, I don't know, you know, where they came from, except I grew up with poor people. I grew up with the kind of young woman who lives next to him. Matter of fact, a lot of them are my girlfriends. She's now, you know, she never went past 8th grade. She doesn't take care of herself. She swears too much. She sleeps with boys who will never love her. And so I think that's what Sarah Orne Jewett said when she said, write what you know. Not so much, you know, your literal life circumstance, but you want to write from your emotional center. And so I think that's where they came from.
Thank you.
If that makes any sense.
Beth had the question. Thank you.
So it's okay.
Hi,
if I
Beth.
talk?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I liked and kind of identified with in the books was the man who was so angry and disappointed about his life. Because that was my father. And he was a communist. I was brought up to be a socialist, communist, Paul Robeson fan, right? So that's
Yeah.
my background.
Wow.
That's right. And
Great.
but he was always yelling. My father yelled. He didn't, and my sister was afraid that he was going to hurt my mother. And she'd say, "Oh no, he would never do that." And he didn't. But he was so angry. And it was a form of abuse in the house, just the ranting and raving that went on. But
Because it's terrifying.
yeah.
My father was a rager. It got scary. Yeah.
Oh, really? Was that in Townie? I don't remember reading that.
I don't know. I mean, he was a Marine captain and he yelled like one for years. The truth is I protected him a little bit in that way.
So here in this book club, you're coming out with it a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, he raged more at my younger brother and my older sister, and he sort of spared me because I became the kind, he liked what I was doing. He especially liked when I, became a fighter and, someone who he wasn't a fighter.
Andre, we have a writing retreat that we do every year, and I bet there's a lot of women on here, and I know there's a lot of survivors who want to write their story, and you're such a master memoirist and teacher. Are there any, like, just encapsulate some advice for anyone memoir about their life and abuse, let's say?
Yep. I have a few things to possibly offer. I would begin with, I think it's really important to not try to say a damn thing. I think the same impulse that sends someone to write a memoir is the same impulse that sends you to therapy, right? I know what happened that summer with my dad, but what the hell happened, right? So if you look at the word to remember, the opposite of remember is not forget. It's actually chop, 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 dismember. And so the act of memory is reaching for the shards, reaching for the pieces. I mean, a therapist will do the same thing. I know there are therapists like Ricky in the room where you would, well, so where was your father? He was on the couch. So where was your mother? Well, she was on the floor. And then your sister came down the stairs right then. Yeah. And so you're recreating the whole, you're reaching for the pieces. So, one of the big things I focus on in fiction writing classes is, Faulkner was asked late in his life, what's the main thing the writer needs? He said, well, it's not talent. He said, I used to think it was talent, but now I think it's curiosity. And his exact phrase was insight, to wonder, to mull and to muse why it is that man does what he does. And if you have that, talent makes no difference whether you've got it or not. So I think the same thing applies to one's own life. Don't think for a second that just because you were there, you know what happened. You don't. So go back, reach for the shards, which means you got to bring at least 3 of the 5 senses, recreate the room. Don't try to make any points. Don't try to say anything. Allow the writing to do it. I'll say 1 more or 2 more things. I think one of the central challenges for the memoirist is, especially the sort of person who's drawn to write a memoir, I have found, is someone who's actually been very well behaved throughout the family and hasn't reported the bad news. And so there's this impulse to be the family biographer out of fairness. Well, I'm going to write about them all. No, don't frigging be the family biographer. It's your turn to reach for the mic. And by the way, who are you writing this for? I would submit to you, it's not for a readership. You will later. It's not for the writer. It's not for you now, because it's going to be actually very painful at times to go back with words. Do it for the 12-year-old girl who you used to be. Do it for the 26-year-old, for the 39, whatever you're doing. Do it for that young one sitting inside you, and ask her, what's it like to be you? And all will be well. Just some opening 2 cents worth.
Does anybody have any comments or questions to Andre about the writing process for memoir, maybe?
Well, but I just got tears in my eyes when it said, get yourself to the 12-year-old girl. What was it like? That just hit me so in my heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Lou. I say that from my own writing experience. I wrote that memoir, Townie, which was an accidental memoir. I was writing an essay and then it turned into a memoir about my youth. And I didn't want to write it. I didn't want to. Partly because I like being behind the curtain. You know, I don't do social media. I like to, you know, I want people to read my books. I don't want them to think about who wrote them. But it was more than that. It was this feeling that, well, it was, I'll throw this out for you guys to think about too. The whole time writing it, you know, I could feel the pain that was coming. I could feel the violence. I could feel the hardship. I could feel the scarcity. I could feel the terror. I could feel the self-loathing. And part of it was just hard to go back there, but it was also, there was this video store in our town a few years ago, back when, you know, you would rewind and, you know, just like last week we had video stores. And there's this teenager, young woman who worked at the desk, and I was returning all these CDs that I didn't even watch. My kids had watched them. I had like a $20 late fee. I said, Cheryl, do I have to pay the late fee? I didn't even watch these. She says, oh, Andre, I called the ambulance. And that was in my head. Oh, poor you. You grew up poor in a tough mill town with a single mom. Try being a lost boy from Sudan who had to hack his mother up with a machete. But it does nobody any good to compare suffering. There's always someone in the world who suffered more than you. But it's very important that you listen to the younger you calling you to go back and sing her song before you're dead.
Thank you. Thank you. That is really beautiful. Martha has a question.
And Rachel looks like too.
And Rachel, yes.
I just wanted to throw this out there. I was driving home from Portland today, and I don't know if you're familiar with the Hidden Brain podcast with Shankar Verdante. He does it.
Great.
It's great. Well, yesterday he has it called Dear Diary, and it's about writing to heal trauma.
Martha, I love that show, and I love listening to that. Man, can I just jump in on that though? Because I do believe, so I've got a book called, you know, the new one's called Ghost Dogs, and the title essay is that, and the whole essay was exploring my fraught relationship with dogs. Why have I never allowed myself to love dogs? And I'll compress here, but I didn't even go into the dogs that I lost as a kid when I wrote Townie. They weren't even my consciousness. And there was a lot of trauma. I mean, the first dog we had was executed by my dad when the dog was 1 year old, and 18 puppies died in my lap and all this other crap. My point is, Martha, when I finished that essay, it actually changed my relationship to our rescue dog from Georgia. I actually felt my heart open up to it from having written the essay. But writing that memoir, all it felt was traumatizing to me. You know, for years I would, I've been working out 5-6 days a week for 50 years because I was a bullied kid. I go to the gym, I'd shut my eyes before I started working out to sort of see the exercises I was going to do for the day. And after writing Townie, I couldn't shut them because I saw men coming after me to beat me up or to, really do me harm. So it kind of re-traumatized me going back there. So I do want to say that can happen too. It may not lead to healing directly for you. That doesn't mean you shouldn't write it.
Did Rachel, do you have a question or comment?
I was gonna just comment about the first time that I ever acknowledged to myself the domestic violence that I grew up witnessing. My father beating my mother on a regular basis. Was in a creative writing class. I was in an MFA program at the University of Arizona right after college. And I was in a writing workshop with Terry McMillan. And the first thing she asked us to do was to write about our most painful experience. And I remember thinking, well, I don't know what to write about. I don't have any painful experiences. Mm-hmm. And the night before the workshop was going to meet, it was like I was in an altered state. I sat down at my computer and I typed up
the night that I was 11 and my brother called the police, and they came to our house. And I think I still, when in the workshop, when she asked, it was my turn to read, and I read it, and I looked up, and the woman sitting across from me was crying, and I couldn't understand what was wrong. And I, I have been trying now, that was in the 80s. So I've been trying to write that story, to write it in a way that feels complete, or there's a meaning that, for me, that's beyond just this thing happened, that this was my experience, but that there's a deeper meaning.
Rachel, have you not written about that since?
Oh no, I've written it in many different versions, as fiction, as nonfiction, memoir.
It sounds to me like you still need to keep writing it.
Oh yeah, I definitely do.
Sounds like there's still some layers you still need to uncover it. And so, I think it's also really helpful for memoirists to be older. When I, in college, so many kids are writing, say, I'm writing a memoir, but how old are you? 22. Like what? You write a memoir about when you were 10?
Right,
memoir,
exactly.
I had to get 40 years down the road from some of that shit to write about it honestly and nakedly. So it sounds like you've got more work to do, but it sounds, Rachel, like it's calling you, and that's beautiful. And the way you describe that to me, I think one of my favorite definitions of art is by Leo Tolstoy, who said, art is transferring feeling from one heart to another. Isn't that beautiful? And I think the only thing that's going to make us feel anything is the truth. It's gotta be the truth.
Mary Kay, did you have a question or comment?
Hi, Andre. I'll try to keep this a little brief. I know we're running a little late. I just wanted to make a couple comments. First of all, I spent the last 17 years of my abusive marriage in Amesbury. So I really was identifying with those places, as well as in Townie. I know all of the places in Haverhill that you were talking about too. So it really touched home for me. And the abuse happened in Amesbury. And I have to say, Tom Lowe, at first, I was having a really hard time with him, because to me, he was playing the victim. And it so made me identify with my ex who tried to kill me. And still afterwards, he played the victim. But another thing is, I just wanted to ask you, did you say that your dad executed a dog?
Yeah. He was a 26-year-old ex-Marine. I was about 3 years old. We lived in a farmhouse. My dad he was at the Outer workshop in Iowa City. It was a cold winter morning. I had the flu, and I remember my mother beseeching my dad, and we had a dog. I just remember his swinging tail and his swinging testicles. He was a 1-year-old handful, very healthy, young, like German Shepherd mix. And my father pulled him out by a rope to the cornfield. I heard 3 shots, so we never saw him again. And I kind of sat on that for all my life until I wrote that essay, Ghost Dogs. And that was just that was the beginning of my relationship to dogs, and frankly, beginning to a different side of my relationship to my father, who scared me on some level.
Yeah, it struck me that you said that, yet I don't think that you identified him as really an abuser. And to me, that's an abuser. And maybe it's because my own ex-husband killed my dog in the process of trying to kill me. But I find it interesting, because I think that animal abuse, animal execution especially, is abusive. And I just wanted to make that point. I also wanted to say that I've been a client of Jeannie Geiger, and I owe them my life. And I just wanted to say that to you.
Thank you.
Thank you to Suzanne.
Yeah, that's the organization my sister runs. I'm so proud to be here, brother. Mary, I'm glad you're out of that.
And Mary's the chief of staff also at Finding Our Voices. And Gina, if you're still here, please.
Hey, sorry, I will try to make it very quick, but I've written a memoir about my arrest for murder. I'm a felon because my abuser reported to the police that my miscarriage was actually murder. So I am never even voted. I've been a felon my entire life, and I have written a memoir, but as I have approached agents here recently, starting to query, I'm getting the message that they want a social media presence. And you said that you avoid social media. So I was wondering if you had suggestions on how to get around this.
This so ticks me off. I cannot tell you. So a publisher will publish your book. It'll cost around $30. I'll buy your book. You get $3 of that. The other 27 goes to the publisher. I'm sorry, it's the goddamn publisher's job to make us public. I will not spend all that time and energy. And by the way, I don't think it makes any difference. And I've got a lot of writer friends who've fallen prey to that stupid, shallow advice and gone on Twitter and whatever these things are called, Snapagram and InstaChat and whatever it is. And all they've done is wasted their time and frankly, demystified their presence in the world. And no one goes out and buys their books anyway. And I'm sorry, ignore it. What I still find is, and too many, I don't want to say too many. I love young people. Publishing is full of young people who stare at their phones. And so their whole reality is in this whole crap. Don't do it. A good book and a great book will find a home. Write the best book you can. Send it out and send it. My first book went to 39 publishers over 7 years. My second book went to 29 publishers over 5 years. My third book, which was House of Sand and Fog, went to 24 publishers over 3 years. For 18 years, 93 rejections, 3 acceptances, and that's normal. So I think we also live in a time where we're very impatient. I think the digital world has made us all a little crazy that way. And so, no, I would fight it, Gina. Fight it. Make sure the book is just as solid as you can possibly make it. You'll find an agent. You'll find a home. Don't do any of that crap.
Thank you.
But it's also easy for me to say I've got a career established and I don't have to do as much as a writer starting out. But I still don't think you should do it. I'm so opposed. The publisher can do their job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
While I'm on the soapbox, I have never bought and I will never buy anything from Amazon. Do you know that before Jeff Bezos came along, there were 20,000 independently owned bookstores in the country, roughly? There are now 500 because of his scorched earth policies. So you're bringing out the cantankerous guy in me, but there's a lot about the digital world that is really not helpful. Although I'm very happy we could have had this meeting on Zoom.
True. Thank goodness for that.
Yeah.
Well, Andre, I want to thank you so very much for this conversation and being so open and honest and also such wonderful advice.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody,
especially
for
for you women who are survivors of domestic violence. I'm so sorry you had to go through that, and I'm glad you're getting whole. Peace and love to you all.
Thank you, Andre.
Andre.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you very much.